Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Sunday morning worship service of the DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church in Naperville, Illinois. I am Kelly Trombley Freitag, a member of your Board of Trustees. We are glad you are here, whether you are present in the sanctuary this morning or watching remotely. It is so good to be together. We welcome you to our church and invite you to get to know us better after the service. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many paths to truth and meaning, and we support one another on our spiritual and religious journeys while holding ourselves in covenant. The rich liberal legacy of Unitarian Universalism is rooted in our faith's 7 principles. These principles guide our faithful actions as we work to transform the world to be more just and equitable. You may find these principles listed on our website or on the wall in our social hall. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your life's journey, wherever you are in the world, you are welcome here. We have a couple of announcements. Next Sunday is Ingathering Sunday, where we will be having our annual water communion. So bring water from a place that is special to you and your family. And we will be hosting a blessing of the backpacks, so bring your backpack to church. The service begins at 10 a.m. Please note this time change, 10 a.m., not 10:30. The service will be followed by an all-church picnic. Please look for more information in the weekly email and newsletter for what you should bring to the picnic and how you can volunteer to help. In addition, we have found what appears to be a child's wallet, so if your child or you yourself has lost your wallet, please come see us after the service. If you are online, we invite you to greet each other through the chat. And if you're present here, I invite you to turn to someone you did not come in with and greet them with a wave and a good morning. Good morning.
Thank you so much, Vera, for the beautiful music. Yesterday, our distant ancestors gathered round a flame to share their stories and find comfort. Tomorrow, our descendants will gather round a flame, talking of a life we will never know. But today, it is we who gather here around this flame, seeking, believing, and being together.
When I was a child, Saturdays were for making pancakes. Every Saturday, my father and I would wake up before everyone else, and we would make the best buttermilk pancakes in the world. The steps were always the same: melt the butter, measure the flour, and mix, mix, mix until it's just smooth enough. I would make the batter in a green and white glass bowl, and my father would cook the pancakes to golden perfection on the griddle. And by the time my mother and my brother awoke, for they were always the last to wake up, the house would smell like maple syrup, butter, and love. I remember making pancakes as an unchanging ritual, wrapping me in comfort and security. And then I came home from college one day, in a time of great transition in my life, looking forward to the comfort and security of pancakes, to find my father making waffles on a Saturday morning. Now, just to give you all some context, I remember the hullabaloo when I was 10 and we were forced to switch brands of powdered buttermilk. Our old brand was discontinued, and changing a single ingredient was a difficult adjustment with a capital D and a capital A. And now here he was changing the entire meal on me with no warning. So I helped make the waffles. I was in such a state of shock I couldn't do anything else. And as I did, I reevaluated my entire childhood. Did we make them every Saturday? Did we always use the green and white glass bowl? Upon reflection, I wasn't sure. I did recall that we tried liquid buttermilk once in another time of desperation, and they were still the best pancakes in the world. And it turned out our waffles are just as good. And this has happened to all of us, right? The small rituals of our lives go entirely unnoticed until they are disrupted. And these small changes in our rituals of living affect us often more deeply than we know. Scientific experiments have actually shown that performing rituals noticeably reduces people's stress, aids them in mourning, and binds people together in cohesive groups. So rituals are no joke. And as we embark on a new church year that promises new ways of doing church, both terrifying and exciting, let us pause this morning to reflect on the meaning and comfort of rituals and the ways that they both balance and respond to change. For if there is one comfort in our lives, if there is one constant in our lives, it is surely change.
Please rise as you are able and join us in singing hymn number 12, O Life That Maketh All Things New, in the gray hymnal.
From
And now please join me in our shared covenant. We come together to affirm our relationship with one another, our shared commitment to our Unitarian Universalist principles, and to our DuPage UU Church community. We recognize our agency and our connective power, and we accept our responsibility to be bold and courageous in relationship with each other so that we might transform ourselves and the world. Our vision of beloved community is rooted in the relationships that we have with each other, our world, and creation. Each week, we share our joys and concerns. Today's flowers were given by Pat and Neil Lichtman in celebration of the first year of Reverend Mandy's ministry with our congregation. We are so pleased to have you here. In times of great unrest and change, it is always important to remember who we have. Let us remember that we still have each other. Even when the cares of the world weigh on us, may we find joy in our connections with each other and in the pleasures that life holds. Let us care for one another and for ourselves in all the ways that we can. And as we hold each other in our hearts and minds with all our joys and all our sorrows, whether spoken or unspoken, please join us together in a moment of meditative prayer.
No temas a la agitación, puesto que es el ritmo de la vida misma. Ser puesto en movimiento, incitarte.
Do not fear agitation, for agitation is the rhythm of life itself. To be put into motion, to be stirred.
No temas los movimientos que descentran lo que creías permanente.
Do not fear the movements that decenter what you always thought permanent.
Llevas dentro el centro de tu entendimiento, la brújula que te muestra el camino.
You carry within you the center of your understanding, the compass to show you the way.
Lleva contigo el amor que te sostendrá, la visión que te guiará, las relaciones con todos los seres y el mundo que te pondrán los pies sobre la tierra. Ve en paz y con una suave agitación, mueve a este mundo hacia el lado del amor.
Carry with you the love that will hold you, the vision that will guide you, the relationships to all beings and the world that will ground you. Go in peace and in gentle agitation to stir this world to the side of love.
It is time to gather. Today's message is The Quilt Story by Tony Johnston and Tommy DiPaolo. A little girl's mother made the quilt to keep her warm when the snow came down long ago. She stitched the quilt by a yellow flame, humming all the time. And she stitched the tails of falling stars and she stitched the name Abigail. Abigail loved the quilt. She wrapped it around her in the quiet dark and watched the winter skies. Sometimes she saw a falling star. Sometimes Abigail played in the woods near her home, and she had tea, her dolls had tea, and the quilt had tea all over it. Sometimes she pretended the quilt was a gown, and she wore it to town on her horse, clop, 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 and it tore. And so her mother stitched it up once more. Sometimes she played hide and seek with her sisters, and she laughed and cried, "Don't peek," and hid under the quilt, and everyone found her. Sometimes Abigail was sick, and she sneezed, and then she slept under the quilt, and she felt better. One day, Abigail's family moved away across wide rivers and over a rock-hard trail. The quilt went too, not stuffed in trunks with the blankets and clothes. It kept the little girls warm from the wild winds, warm from the rain, warm from the sparkling nights. They built a new house in the woods, and Abigail's father built it with his hatchet, chop, chop, chop. And he built her a new bed, chip, chip, chip. And he made her a new horse, too. He worked until curly shavings covered the floor, and everyone sneezed and said, "Welcome home," and was glad. And Abigail felt sad. New house, new horse, new bed. Everything smelled of fresh chops and chips, everything but the quilt. So her mother rocked her as mothers do, and then tucked her in, and Abigail felt at home again under the quilt. One day, when the quilt was very old and very loved, Abigail folded it carefully and put it in the attic, and everyone forgot it was there. A gray mouse came and loved the quilt. Her babies were born on top of it, and they grew fat and gray in the warm stuffing. And when they got hungry, they ate the falling star. A raccoon came and loved the quilt, and she dug a hole in a corner with her back paws and hid an apple there. A cat came and loved the quilt, a patchwork cat. It rolled on the stars and stuffing spilled out like snow, and then the cat curled up in the snow and purred. "Kitty, kitty," called a little girl, and she found her cat, and she found the quilt, splashed with patterns of sun. And the little girl wrapped the quilt around her, and she loved it too. "Can you make it new?" she asked her mother. So her mother patched the holes, and she pushed fresh stuffing in, and she stitched long tails on the stars to swish across the quilt again. And one day, the little girl's family moved away across miles and miles of pavement and snaking gray highways, and they found a new house, freshly cleaned, freshly waxed, freshly painted, white. And they unpacked and unpacked all night, and everyone sneezed on cardboard dust and said, "Welcome home," and was glad. And the little girl felt sad. Everything smelled of white paint and boxes, everything but the quilt. So her mother rocked her as mothers do, and then tucked her in, and she felt at home again under the quilt. It is now time for the children to go to the religious education classes. Those that are in middle school or older, if they would like to join to be helpers, they can, or you may remain in the service. Let's sing to the children.
Good morning. The giving of our treasure is how we reciprocate the many gifts we are given by this community. Your contribution supports the programs and operations of DuPage UU Church. Giving is also how we live our values in the world. Each month, we share our offerings with an organization nominated by the congregation and selected by the special offerings team. During the month of June, $1,738.79 was collected for Youth Outlook. Thank you for your continuing generosity and support. During August, the special offering will benefit Working Bikes, nominated by Dave Gorman. I like people to know who people are. During August, the special offering, Working Bikes collects 11,000 used bikes annually for reuse locally and internationally. Volunteers and employers repair 2,000 of these bikes for donation in the Chicagoland region through charitable partners for homeless individuals, immigrants, veterans, and children of low-income families. Working Bikes is an incredibly efficient and effective grassroots organization that makes great use of hundreds of volunteers and the free resource of used bikes to empower people with free/affordable transportation throughout the Chicagoland region, including DuPage County. For more information, you can visit their website at https://workingbikes.org. The offering is given and received in a spirit of generosity and gratitude.
¿Quién dijo que todo está perdido? Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón. Tanta sangre que se llevó el río. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón. No será tan fácil, yo sé que pasa. No será tan simple como pensaba, como abrir el pecho y sacar el alma, una cuchilla de amor, luna de los pobres siempre abierta. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón como un documento inalterable. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón y uniré las puntas de un mismo lazo y me iré tranquilo, me iré despacio y te daré todo y me darás algo que me alivie un poco más cuando no haya nadie cerca o lejos. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón cuando los satélites no alcancen. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón y hablo de países y de esperanzas. Hablo por la vida, hablo por la nada, hablo de cambiar esta nuestra casa, de cambiarla por cambiar no más. ¿Quién dijo que todo está perdido? Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón.
This reading is titled A History of Church, including yours, by Sean Neil Barron. One day, your church was born. Maybe it was a gathering of saints called together for the common worship of a wrathful God, ceaselessly praying between bouts of decrying the evil of Christmas or dancing. Or maybe a few brave souls answered a notice in a newspaper, a curiosity piqued by the announcement of a religion where free thinking and tolerance were the bedrocks. No matter how it happened, your church was born, a gathering of people, humble, caring, anxious, and quirky, all at the same time, who covenanted to be with one another on the journey of life, death, and everything in between. And so it began. A faithful few, beautifully imperfect, called to that central task, that human task of connecting, loving, and serving. It was just a baby, and yet it was thrust deep into the human condition, tasked to hold minds and souls, bodies and hearts, along the roller derby of disease and birth, infighting and joy and Christmas pageants, sometimes all of those at the same time. They gathered to hear the world broken open for insightful sermons, rejuvenating music, and a community whose fierce devotion to each other's well-being rivaled a mama bear's for her cubs. But it wasn't always like that, of course. There were those trying times, and I don't just mean Phyllis or Jack, those stubborn but lovable souls who inhabit the netherworld of committee meetings. No, I mean the trying times, when the church almost split in half over the war, or integration, or when the mill left the town vacant, or when the minister crossed that line and the people couldn't speak about it for decades. But somehow, you were still here, still on the town common, still a church that everyone recognizes, still the ones that show up every time you were called on, still using the communion silver until you voted to sell it. New people came and they changed things. Small things, big things, things that nobody noticed as it happened until suddenly it was hard to even recognize anything anymore. That was a hard moment, a tearful moment. And other things changed too. The proclamations about God, once heard loud from the pulpit, softened. Wrathful became loving. Distant became intimate. Mandatory became optional. After the war, the nursery and the RE classrooms were overflowing. Each baby dedicated reminded the church of the incredible beauty of life and the gift of this community, all huddled around the baby and what it would bestow upon this child. The history of your church is more a story of the determination of love to break forth than it is about the tie-dye or chalices, sermon discussions, or social justice committee meetings. The history of the church is the history of human enterprise, evolving in its sights and sounds, yet revolving always around its core. The history of your church is the gift of potential and momentum, of baggage and personality. The history of your church is the launch pad from which you spring into action or disarray. Each day, your church is born.
Please remain seated and join us in singing hymn number 1009, Meditation on Breathing. Please join in whichever part speaks to you.
A child and her father make pancakes together almost every Saturday morning. When her daughter is sad and homesick, her mother rocks her in a rocking chair, as mothers do, and then tucks her in, and she feels safe again under the quilt. Every morning at approximately 10:35 a.m., soon to be 9:05, a group of people light the same chalice together to remind each other that they are a unified community dedicated to something larger than themselves. Our rituals, large and small, bring structure to our lives. In their book, Mighty Stories, Dangerous Rituals, ministers Herbert Anderson and Edward Foley discuss the power of rituals and storytelling in services, explaining that rituals not only construct reality and make meaning, they help fashion the world as a habitable and hospitable place. They help us fashion the world as a habitable and hospitable place. They help us make the world livable, even when it doesn't seem livable. Rituals can be soothing, or they can be a signal to our bodies and our minds. Now it is time for joy, forgiveness, remembrance, resurrection, hope, sorrow, courage. They also provide us a safe place to experience our emotions in community. And I would venture to say that they can be so important to our emotional expression that if we don't take the time to engage in our rituals, those emotions can well up inside of us, waiting for a ritual to be released. This happened for me during the summer of 2021, when my beloved cat, Samwise, suffered several months of declining health, and eventually the veterinarian came to visit us and allowed him to pass away peacefully in the backyard, in my arms. And as we buried him in the garden, I cried, and I cried, and I cried, to the point where I realized I was not just mourning my cat. I realized afterwards that I had not attended a funeral since the pandemic began. And though people I knew had died, though the world had gone through huge and traumatic change largely associated with death, I had never been offered a vessel that was clearly labeled to hold my grief. And once I encountered a ritual that I recognized, my mind and my body knew what to do. And after grieving, finally, in that moment, I felt relieved in a way that I had not for at least a year. Rituals matter. They matter deeply, even when we don't want them to. They are signposts in our day, in our year, in our lives, reminding us of what is important. And we are not weak or uptight to need rituals in our lives. We are simply human. So from this perspective, it makes sense that we feel betrayed or threatened by an unwelcome change in ritual. Rituals literally help us feel safe. For me, the ritual of making pancakes on Saturday morning marked the end of the school week and the beginning of family time, so the pancakes had become a symbol of love and safety. And when they changed into waffles, I didn't recognize the ritual. And for a moment, I didn't recognize my world. The really interesting part here is that I talked to my father about this sermon before I gave it, and he said for him, the important part of the ritual is the green and white glass bowl. So, it's not his fault. He was just trying something fun and new. He didn't know how the pancakes were so powerful in my life, and that change would shake me. It gave me another perspective, too, on that one Sunday when we couldn't find that bowl. He really did seem pretty upset. My Couldn't figure out why. And these things are bound to happen, right? Small changes affect our rituals all the time, like our phone runs out of power before that weekly call home. The minister changes the way that our water in-gathering service will work. Bigger things too, a death in the family, a new job, changes in climate patterns. And our church changes around us too. Not even single changes like the minister changing a ritual or people inventing a new one. And in point of fact, my husband Chris and I presented a service titled Embracing Change several years ago, at a time when our own personal lives and the life of the church were poised for large changes. We thought this would be an appropriate topic. And I was reminded of that when writing this service, and I looked up the actual date of when we gave it, and it was August 11th, 2013. So apparently I have a ritual every 10 years. I get up and talk about change. So you can look for me in 2023. But reflecting back on that experience made me think about our church. Our church has changed greatly in the past 10 years in terms of our organizational structure, our staff, the holidays that we celebrate, and how we celebrate them, even who is sitting in the pews and doing the work of the congregation. Chris and I delivered that service in this sanctuary. We lit that same chalice that morning, but we gave that service to a different church. In his book, Reading, Writing, and Ritualizing, Ronald Grimes discusses how rituals can, and in fact must, change. Rituals are always in the process of being created. In fact, they need to be recreated. Each succeeding generation, with its new stories and fresh challenges, must weave together recent tales with those of their ancestors, he writes. And recent tales in this context doesn't mean just current books and movies, but the unfolding story of humanity. War, scientific discovery, pandemics, shifts in culture, changes in belief, changes in church membership. These are the unfolding story of humanity. And if we want our rituals to remain healthy and helpful, we must incorporate them into our rituals. Sometimes we change our rituals because they are no longer meaningful, sometimes because we find something better. Sometimes we change them because we realize that the old ritual was harmful to our community in some way. And it's easy to see these changes as interruptions in the ritual, as threats. But they aren't. They're part of the ritual. Whether we make changes to rituals for joyous reasons or because of a true threat to our safety and our happiness, those changes are part of the ritual because they are part of the human condition. They are part of our story, and our ritual is an expression of that story and a vessel for that story. It's a vessel in which we can place our joys and our sorrows, our hopes and our bitterness, and pay attention to them for a moment and acknowledge them, and hopefully see what they are trying to tell us about what matters in life. And I know it's tempting to say that we've always done something a certain way, but it's very rarely accurate, is the problem. It's like when I realized that we don't always make the pancakes in the same bowl, and we hadn't always used the same ingredients. I mean, did our church always pass out flowers to each other at flower communion? Did we always line up in a line? Have we always had coffee hour? I actually don't know. Have we always had religious education during services? I don't know for sure. But I do know that a lot of the things that we do, including our rituals, water ingathering, flower communion, our tag and our coming of age services in the spring, a lot of those rituals have changed over time. In fact, we used to use a different chalice than the one that we're using this morning. It was a wooden one when we had service back in the Learning Center. For quite a while, I don't think that youth ever lit it as they often do during the church year. We didn't used to extinguish it regularly at the end of the service. And in fact, the chalice symbol itself is less than 100 years old. It was made by an Austrian artist named Hans Deutsch, who was a refugee during World War II, and he designed it for the Unitarian Service Committee. They wanted a symbol to stamp the paperwork that they were issuing for refugees. Artists, authors, scientists, political dissidents fleeing the Nazi regime. And that's where it first started. In fact, lighting a chalice only became commonplace in Unitarian Universalist services in the last 40 years. And when I read that, I was shocked. The ritual of lighting a chalice at the beginning of a service is younger than some members of this church. And yet, to me, it is impossible to separate the flaming chalice from my own concept of Unitarian Universalism. It's my pancakes. Someday it'll probably change. Maybe we won't light it at the beginning of every single service. I don't know, but probably something will be different. And I hope when that happens, that someone will sit quietly with me and give me a gentle hug and let me cry about it for a while, because I'm sure I will, and tell me that it will be okay. But until then, I take great comfort every time we light this chalice together, even as other rituals change around us. It has been nearly 20 years since the waffle incident, when my father made waffles instead of pancakes and threw me into a tailspin. But I make pancakes now with my father and my 6-year-old in the same green and white glass bowl. Sometimes only one of us is really interested in making the pancakes. Sometimes we make waffles instead. We have adapted the ritual to include a whole new person and 2 people who are much older than they used to be. And the process is always more chaotic than I remember it being, but I am so grateful for the ritual reminder of love and family and the insight that comes from adapting to change. And I have confidence that we as a church will continue to do a similar thing. After all, is there any more UU tradition than changing a ritual to make it better, than inventing a new one, or considering how it could be better next time? So may it be.
Please stand as you are able and join us in singing hymn number 347, Gather the Spirit.
Trust in His
As our church grows and changes, I invite us to consider what rituals are changing in ways that distress us. What needs did they meet for us? If it helps, take comfort in a ritual that is currently not changing. There are many of them. We observed many rituals just this morning. And ask yourself and your friends, what rituals are changing in ways that delight you? For it is not foolishness to mourn a change in rituals or to welcome a new one. It is simply human. It is just as human as our need to alter the rituals for those who come after us. Thank you.
Please join me in our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish the light of this chalice, but not the light in our hearts. Until we meet again, may the warmth of our community carry you.